Okay, folks, welcome to the Patriots Pub. Pull up a stool, vibe on your favorite beverage, and let's walk through the United States history together, learning from our founding fathers and our founding documents what this country truly stands for. And I want to welcome Loki and Troy LaPlante, who has joined us for the evening. Welcome, guys.
Good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Happy to be here once again.
Okay, I'm going to start the evening off with a little something from A Patriot's History of the United States. It's a wonderful book. I suggest you all get one for your house. It's an excellent book to have reference, especially if you have children. You can find it in my sidebar on uncooperative.blogger.com. I have a link to it there. Washington shuddered upon assuming command of the 30,000 troops surrounding Boston on July 3rd, 1775. He found fewer than 50 cannons and an ill-equipped, mixed multitude of people, comprising militia from New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. Franklin actually suggested arming the military with bows and arrows. Interesting footnote. Although Washington theoretically commanded a total force of 300,000 scattered throughout the American colonies, in fact, he had a teeny actual combat force. Even the so-called regulars lacked discipline and equipment, despite bounties offered to attract soldiers and contributions from patriots to bolster the stores. Some willingly fought for what they saw as a righteous cause or for what they took as a threat to their homes and families, but others complained that they were fed with promises or clothed with filthy rags. Scarce materials drove up costs for the Army and detracted from an efficient collection and distribution of goods, a malady that plagued the colonial armies until the end of the war. Prices paid for goods and labor in industry always exceeded those that the Continental Congress could afford, and beyond its ability to raise in taxation, making it especially difficult to obtain troops. Nevertheless, the regular units provided the only stable body under Washington's command during the conflict, even as they came and went routinely because of the expiration of enlistment terms. Against the ragtag force mustered by the colonies, Great Britain pitted a military machine that had recently defeated the French and Spanish armies, as we have covered, supplied and transported by the largest, best trained, and most lavishly supplied navy on earth. Britain also benefited from numerous established forts and outposts, a colonial population that in part remained loyal, and the absence of immediate European rivals who could drain time, attention, or resources from the war in America. Remember, they just came after a global war on the French and have won. They no longer are fighting anybody. In addition, the British had an able war commander in the person of General William Howe and several experienced officers such as Major General John Burgoyne and Lord Cornwallis. Nevertheless, English forces faced a number of serious, if unapparent, obstacles when it came to conducting campaigns in America. First and foremost, the British had to operate almost exclusively in hostile territory. That had not encumbered them during the French and Indian War. So many officers reasoned it would not present a problem in this conflict. But in the French and Indian War, the British had the support of most of the local population, whereas now English movements were usually reported by patriots to American forces, and militias could harass them at will on the march. Second, command of the sea made little difference in the outcome of battles in interior areas. Worst, the vast barrier posed by the Atlantic made resupply and reinforcement by sea precarious, costly, and uncertain. Communications also hampered the British. Submitting a question to the High Command in England might entail a 3-month turnaround time, contingent upon good weather. Third, no single port city offered a strategic center from which the British forces could deploy. At one time, the British had 6 armies in the colonies, yet they never managed to bring their forces together in a single overwhelming campaign. They had to conduct operations through a wide expanse of territory along a number of fronts involving seasonal changes from snow in New Hampshire to torrid heat in the Carolinas, all the while searching for rebels who disappeared into mountains, forests, or local towns. Fourth, British officers, though capable in European-style war, never adapted to fighting a frontier rebellion against another Western-style army that had already adapted to the new battlefield. Competent leaders such as Howe made critical mistakes, while less talented officers like Burgoyne bungled completely. At the same time, Washington slowly developed aggressive officers like Nathaniel Greene, Ethan Allen, and before his traitorous actions, Benedict Arnold. Fifth, England hoped that the Iroquois would join them as allies, and that conversely the colonists would be deprived of any assistance from the European powers. Both hopes were dashed. The Iroquois Confederacy declared neutrality in 1776, and many other tribes agreed to neutrality soon thereafter as a result of efforts by Washington's able emissaries to the Indians. A few tribes fought for the British, particularly the Seneca and Cayuga, but two of the Iroquois Confederacy tribes actively supported the Americans, and the Onondaga divided their loyalties between. As for keeping European nations out, as we will find later, that doesn't work. All right, so we'll start with discussing now how Washington had an army foisted upon him and a leadership that he didn't want. He's facing the British Army, of which he once was an officer, and he's got a ragtag, ill-equipped, ill-funded army, and this is where we left off last show. Let's start with Loki. What do you have to add? Go ahead.
Oh, nothing at this point. I think we're right to where we left off, and I'm just kind of waiting to continue on. Back at you.
Oh, okay, Troy. I heard a little giggle out there. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I was laughing at, Brian, was you had mentioned two states and the differences in weather. I grew up in New Hampshire, and I'm thinking, what? They have snow in New Hampshire? Yeah, and of course they do, because I'm used to the 3-4 feet of snow. And then I moved to North Carolina. So you were mentioning about the heat that we get down here. Give you an example. I'm sitting here in the comfort of my home where it's 84 degrees. We're expecting a 98-degree scorcher tomorrow. So I'm familiar with the differences in temperatures that they had to endure. And when you've got an ill-equipped army, obviously they didn't have air conditioning. They didn't have electricity like we've got today. And I think about these poor saps who get stuck. We always hear about Valley Forge and how cold it was. I've been in that region before. I know how cold it does get, and I do know about how frigid that you have to put up with up in the Shire of New Hamp, and what it gets like to be down here in the Carolinas. So when you start fighting in the Deep South, and when you've got the high humidity days. So those are some of the things that I was very familiar with as you were reading. But other than that, that's the only other thing I've got to say is, just as you were speaking about the Patriots' history of the United States, I did do exactly like you said, and went to your blog, and then just placed my order. So I'm expecting that book probably within the next week. I'm done.
Oh, great. Good for you. This is a fabulous book. I've got to tell you, folks. Fabulous book. Yeah, Lucky.
Yeah, one thing I just want to let you guys know, we're under a severe thunderstorm warning for the next 40 minutes or so. So if I drop off the line because we lose power, and hopefully we won't, if we do, we won't lose it for an extended period of time. But just want to let you know, I'm going to try to stay on. Back at you.
Oh, we're not familiar with being dropped offline here, Loki. It never happens. No, never. You should have tuned in to the live SPP rally, anti-SPP rally coverage. Severe thunderstorms came over here for 2 days. All I kept doing is dropping off. Oh, that was a nightmare. Okay, so let's move on. I'll try and do a little bit more here in a timeline fashion. July 5th, 1775. The Continental Congress adopts the Olive Branch Petition, which expresses hope for a reconciliation with Britain, appealing directly to the king for help in achieving this. In August, King George III refuses to even look at the petition and instead issues a proclamation declaring the Americans to be in a state of open rebellion. Yeah, I call it the "you must snitch on your fellow colonists" proclamation. That's basically what it said. The Olive Branch petition, written in the early days of the American Revolution, was a letter to King George III from members of the Second Continental Congress, who for the final time appealed to their king to redress colonial grievances in order to avoid more bloodshed. The Olive Branch petition has been called different names over the years, the most popular of which include the Second Petition to the King and the Humble Petition, because it was, it's pretty, the wording was very conciliatory, although
it is
not giving anything up. It was very, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, it was humble. They weren't pretentious. They weren't saying, you do this or else. They were actually begging. It sounded like to me they were begging, please, 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 let's fix this before it's too late. Yeah, Troy.
Yeah, they were. You're right. They were very flowery. They were very verbose in what they were saying, and they were very complimentary towards the king. All the verbiage that they used. It's kind of amazing reading it, because I was doing that earlier today before the show, going over it, and because I'd read it and studied that up for last week. And this is actually one of my favorite sections that we're about to hit, is the Olive Branch petition, just because they poured their hearts out. There were some people who agreed with it, some people who disagreed with it. But the fact is, at the Second Continental Congress, and they almost exactly a year before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, these folks laid out, look, we've had bloodshed. We don't want to have bloodshed anymore. You're basically, in a nutshell, you're a kind and gracious king, but there's a lot of things that you've done here that the laws that we're kind of kicking against, they're not good for you, they're not good for us, and it was actually very flowery, very complimentary, very kind. And you're right. There were no ultimatums, but what they were saying is basically, we want to work with you, but not at our own expense and not that of our own safety. And there's a couple paragraphs that we can get into that I thought were very pertinent that I've pulled out of that petition that we can get to as you go a little further.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. I'd like to point out, too, that they didn't put any blame on the king at all. They actually put all the blame on his incompetent servants, however you want to word that, people that worked under him that were working for him. They put all the blame and said, we know you wouldn't do that. It's all these guys' fault. It was kind of funny, and they really expected this to work. And, it might have done something, we don't know, except about what I'm about to get to, that kind of threw the monkey wrench into the whole works. We'll never know whether he would have had any acceptance to it or not, or congeniality. But when the Congress convened in May 1777, the delegates were deeply divided over how to deal with the ongoing crisis with Great Britain. Most delegates followed John Dickinson in his quest to reconcile with the king. However, a small group of delegates, led by John Adams, believed that war was inevitable. During the course of the Second Continental Congress, Adams and his group of radicals decided the wisest course of action was to remain quiet and wait for the opportune time to rally the people. This decision allowed John Dickinson and his followers to pursue whatever means of reconciliation they wanted. It was during this time that the idea of the Olive Branch petition was approved. The Olive Branch petition was first drafted by Thomas Jefferson, but Dickinson found Jefferson's language too offensive. Dickinson rewrote most of the document, although some of the conclusions remained Jefferson's. Dickinson blamed the problems between the colonies and Great Britain on the king's irresponsible ministers, as well as those artful and cruel enemies who abuse your royal confidence and authority, end quote. Dickinson claimed that the colonies did not want independence, but they merely wanted to negotiate trade and tax regulations with Great Britain. Dickinson suggested the king draw up a final plan or agreement to settle trade disputes. To help the king with his plan, Dickinson also suggested that either colonists were given free trade and taxes equal to those levied on the people in Great Britain, or no taxes and strict trade regulations. The letter was signed and sent to London on July 8, 1775. Dickinson had hoped that the word of the bloodshed at Lexington and Concord, combined with the humble petition, would inspire the king to at least negotiate with the colonists. Unfortunately, as the world turns, his petition was undermined by a confiscated letter of John Adams. John Adams had written a letter to a friend expressing his discontent with the Olive Branch petition. In his letter, he wrote that the war was inevitable and that he thought the colonies should have already raised the Navy and captured British officials. This confiscated letter arrived in Great Britain about the same time as the Olive Branch petition. The British used Adams' letter to claim that the Olive Branch petition was insincere. Even though the king discarded the petition, it still served a very important purpose in America's independence. The king's rejection of the petition gave Adams and his radicals the opportunity they needed to push for independence. The Olive Branch petition actually served as the major turning point in the American independence movement. After the king rejected the Olive Branch, it polarized the issue in the minds of colonists. It showed them that they could either submit unconditionally or gain complete independence. Familiar times. All right. Since Troy was in last, Loki, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Yeah, and I think that was pretty pivotal in the history of the war. And the thing is, where the colonists were actually trying, or a group of the colonists were trying to settle this thing with no further bloodshed, there were still also other colonists that had made the determination that they felt that war was inevitable with England, like you said. And you can see actually parallels even into modern history on that, where you had groups that felt that negotiation and appeasement was one way to approach it, and then there were other groups at the same time that said, no, we shouldn't do this. War is inevitable, and we will eventually be fighting. And I don't know if that, I think that probably really infuriated King George. He was looking at it, that you had a group of people here that sent this letter, and at the same time we get this other letter, and he was looking at it that, these guys are just talking out of both sides of their mouth, and I'm gonna squash them like a bug. And I know that John Adams was definitely on the hit list for the British Army, even throughout the entire war. It was just that fortunately he did have some sort of diplomatic status when he was dealing with the British later on in the war, where that they would not cause him any harm. Back at you.
True, absolutely true. Troy, now I'm really happy you brought something to the party. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things, the reason I like the Olive Branch petition is, number one, it shows where people, even though they had a divided opinion, as you just read, when you start looking at how one side certainly wanted the what some would call appeasement, but then you start looking at Dickinson and his side, who said, look, we really, really need to do something. I understand wholeheartedly what it's like to implore as a final resort. I've been sharing Loki with him some of what's been going on in my personal life, so I relate to this very, very well. But there are a couple sections that out of the Olive Branch petition, which is available online, anybody can go read it. And if anybody doesn't have it, and if you're too lazy to go find it, I'm sure if you get a hold of Brian through his uncooperative.blogger.com, get a hold of me through troylaplante.com, I'll send it to you. there's one passage that says, knowing to what violent resentments and incurable animosities civil discords are apt to exasperate and inflame the contending parties, we think ourselves required by indispensable obligations to Almighty God, to your Majesty, to our fellow subjects, and to ourselves, immediately to use all the means within our power, not incompatible with our safety, for stopping the further effusion of blood and for averting and impending, if I can read properly, calamities that threaten the British Empire. So that paragraph or that section tells me that they felt a duty to talk to the king, implore him so that we don't keep escalating. We owe it to God, we owe it to the king, we owe it to our fellow subjects, we owe it to ourselves, and to do everything we can. But we're not going to do it at our own peril. But we need to stop the bloodshed. We need to stop what's going to escalate into a calamity that's going to threaten the British Empire. I'll stop there for comment from you guys, but I've got one more section here that I thought was pertinent.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think that it was very important. I mean, they were trying to say, look, this is the benefit to both of us. Why don't we sit down and work this out before things get out of hand? Kind of hinting that things are about to get out of hand if something isn't done. Very important. Go ahead, Loki.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it was actually a goal to stop any further bloodshed, because I think that the Second Continental Congress understood what the cost of this was going to be. And I think that they were also willing to take the stand against tyranny, but were also willing to work together with the Crown to come up with a solution so that there would be no further bloodshed. And, I can look at it in one point of view and say it was a very admirable thing that they did to try to stop this, but I still wonder if the wheels that have been put in motion from 1763 on, did we have the ability to stop that motion? Back at you.
Brian,
Yeah,
you want to take it, or you want me to go?
Yeah, we're working up. Go ahead, Troy.
Okay. But yeah, when you guys were commenting about that, yeah, the crux of that whole olive branch petition was summed up in that one paragraph, and then the next section that I think is very pertinent says, we not only most ardently desire the former harmony between us and these colonies may be restored, but that a concord may be established between them upon so firm a basis as to perpetuate its blessings uninterrupted by any future dissensions to succeeding generations in both countries, and to transmit your Majesty's name to posterity. Here they're getting flowery again, and they're being flattering. Adorned with that signal and lasting glory that has attended the memory of these illustrious personages whose virtues and abilities have extricated states from dangerous convulsions, and by securing the happiness to others, have erected the most noble and durable monuments to their own fame. Basically, they're like I said, they're flattering him during the latter section of that paragraph. But what I really get out of that, they ardently desire the former harmony between Her Majesty or His Majesty and the colonies, England and the colonies, and a concord or a pact or a resolution of basically being one of mind between them and us on a basis to perpetuate blessings and not have future dissent. And they even talk about to succeeding generations, obviously, to set that in motion ad infinitum. So those two sections, that first section I read and the first couple sentences, actually that's one big, long, run-on sentence in the second one, but those are the crux of this entire thing, basically given one last opportunity. Okay, we've had bloodshed. All right, we've had open war. We've had open taxation. We've had great acts of rebellion. We've had an awful lot of talk, as we're doing now, sitting in a pub, talking about all the problems that we've had with Mother England. But before we go any further, let's make one last attempt, one last hurrah to try to nip it in the bud before anything really escalates. And then from here, just looking at the timeline, this olive branch petition was really the last hurrah before we start to really dig in and we start to really get the sense of, okay, we've been dumped on enough. The king won't even listen to us. Therefore, all hope is gone, and now we're really going to do the PR push to head towards independence. I'm done.
No, excellent analogy. I mean, this pretty much turned the majority of the colonists against the crown once and for all. It showed that there was no reconciliation possible, where before they all thought there was many who thought there was, and they didn't really think a war was inevitable. Of course, those bright forefathers that were prescient could see that the war was coming no matter what you did. Let them do their little thing, and we'll wait till the iron's hot, and then we'll strike, and which they did. It's important to note that we've talked about this through the different shows, how over, 100-something years now, they've been trying to reason with the crown. This wasn't they taxed our tea, that's it. War! I mean, that's how it's always portrayed in the history books, at least when they used to teach it at all. Very complicated. It took a long time for them to actually come to the point where they were going to decide to take on one of the most powerful empires, or at least nations, in the world. And that's no small task, folks. I mean, you're really putting everything on the line. You know it's going to be bloody. You know it's going to be vicious. You know lots of people are dying. You know lots of houses and towns are going to be burned. You can just imagine the horrors that didn't may or may not happen, but they could imagine. They thought it was going to be a conflagration beyond belief. So this is real important. I mean, it shows that they really didn't just hastily decide to go to war with Britain, with the crown, and I think that's important. And I think that's why this last effort was actually, I think Adams was smart to let it go, because it actually coalesced a lot of people that weren't on his side, ready to go to war, to his and others' calls. So that was really important. We're moving up to something I really wish I could read, but that'd be long and boring infinitum, I got to tell you. They did go on back then, so I can't read the whole thing. But so we go on to July 6, 1775. The Continental Congress issues a declaration on the causes and necessity of taking up arms, detailing the colonists' reasons for fighting the British, and states the Americans are resolved to die free men rather than live as slaves. Now, if you were to read this, folks, I mean, if you were to actually read it, this is a long version of the Declaration of Independence. That's the best way I could describe it. It is a long version of the Declaration of Independence, just saying on and on. We tried this, we tried that, you're this, and you're that, and this happened. And it goes on for, I don't know, ever. So I can't really read it all to you. But if you get a chance to, you should look at it. And you should always have a pen and paper available. But it's on historyplace.com. It's one of the sources I use, one of many. historyplace.com/United States/revolution/clauses.htm. Obviously, if you go to the History Place, get to the United States, get to the Revolution, you can find causes. But it reminds me of the Declaration of Independence, but in a less compact and graceful manner. This was really, when you think about it, I consider this really the first Declaration of Independence. Declaration of the causes and necessity of taking up arms. That's kind of really, isn't that really the first Declaration of Independence? These are the reasons we're going to fight you, and that's it. Then later on they come up with the Declaration of Independence, which we will go into in great detail. But I think this, July 6, 1775 here, is where the first Declaration of Independence was actually stated. And nobody ever talks about the Declaration of the causes and necessity of taking up arms. I keep repeating that so you'll remember it and maybe get to write it down before I'm done speaking. Did either of you do any research on the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms? We'll start with Loki. Go ahead.
No, I've read it, but I didn't really go deep into it as far as what it was saying. But yeah, I think it is what you say is the first Declaration of Independence. And you said it's longer, but I think the original Declaration actually did a better job of nailing down all their grievances with the Crown. And they basically laid them out one right after another, all 27 of them. And it was, I think there was also, well, when we get talking about the Declaration, I will basically talk about more about that. But I think also the Declaration of Independence has one of the most powerful lines of any document in U.S. history. And it's actually the last sentence in the Declaration. Back at you.
Okay, well, we're really going to wait to hear that one. Some similarities. If it were possible for men who exercise their reason to believe that the divine author of our existence intended a part of the human race to hold an absolute property in and an unbounded property over others, marked out by his infinite goodness and wisdom as the objects of a legal domination never rightfully resistible, however severe and oppressive, the inhabitants of these colonies might at least require from the Parliament of Great Britain some evidence that this dreadful authority over them has been granted to the body. I bring this up because I want to talk about how back in this time people of education seemed to be in love with verbosity. That was one sentence. That was not a paragraph. That was one sentence. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but you're right. The flowery language that they use is something that would be aberrant to my elementary school teachers who often criticized people like myself. I got in trouble for run-on sentences, and I'm a columnist in a newspaper, and I've learned that you can't just write big, long sentences like that. I actually go back and edit quite a bit after the fact, knowing that people are not going to enjoy big run-on sentences like I am using right now at this particular time without taking any pauses, perhaps, or maybe putting in a few commas here or there, and unto the great white throne, yada, yada, yada. But you're right. They did write like that, very flowery, and they did it quite often as a way of showing, first of all, we're not stupid. So you're not just dealing with a couple of hicks who sat down with a quill and ink. In addition to that, they did it as a sign of respect quite often. They weren't always straight to the point. They eventually got around to the point, but they just took the long way about it. Dude, this delay on your phone thing. Get a new phone.
Back at you. Sorry, I'm in the middle. I love my mountain and my polita phone. Notice we don't talk over each other. That's a good thing. I'm sorry, folks, for using a word like verbosity. It's a form of verbose, which means to use lots and lots and lots and lots and go on and go on and go on and go on. And we all know people like that. But they were definitely in love with it back then. And like Troy said, it was a sign of intellect. Again, it shows a little narcissism on the side of the educated back in these times. I think if I was the king of England, I'd kill myself, like many of them have, and like he eventually does. Because if I had to read crap like this every day, yeah, I'd just shoot myself. And worse off, when people talk to you, they speak to you this way without ever actually speaking to you. I'd be like, hey, dude, could you get to the point? I don't have all day here. You're making my head hurt. What are you trying to say? I mean, you really got to sit down to that whole sentence and try and figure out what the heck it even means. It's like that. You got to take out like 90% of the words to actually get to the point of what the heck he was trying to say. Reading this whole thing actually drove me nuts. It's like I had to sit there. I had to keep stopping every sentence and go, what does that mean? Wait a minute. Let me think of that. Let me go over that again. I mean, when you have to do that, I mean, that is an example, to me, that is an example of someone that should never be a writer. And I could give you examples, and I'll give an example here. But, this isn't politics. This is a book review for me. The person who wrote White Gold Wielder, that whole series, that was the most verbose nonsense I ever read in my life. Dune comes to mind too. I couldn't get through either book. Couldn't get through them. I tried 3 times each book. This is not entertaining. This is not fun to do. I think they went back to the founding fathers for their inspiration. So I can understand how some people go back and try. Yeah, I can see how some people can go back to these things and say, forget it. This is just, I'm not going to read this. So that's what we're going to try and get. We'll read it for you, kind of summarize it like we've been doing, and that's kind of what we're trying to do here. But if you want to go read it for yourself, again, it's on historyplace.com/United States/revolution/causes.htm, and you can read the whole thing for yourself. Feel free. But you'll notice there's a lot of things that were taken, if you've read the Declaration of Independence, I think from this and used in the Declaration of Independence, but I have no proof of said, but it came first, so there you have it. All right, so let's move on. Now I'm getting verbose. On July 6, 1775, an American post officer is established with Ben Franklin as Postmaster General. I bet you people didn't know that. I'm not talking about Troy and Loki. November 28, 1775, the American Navy is established by Congress. That's November 28, 1775. The next day, Congress appoints a secret committee to seek help from European nations. Very important, because they needed funding. Money. December 23rd, 1775, King George III issues a royal proclamation closing the American colonies to all commerce and trade to take effect March of 1776. Also in December, Congress is informed that France may offer support in the war against Britain. Very important. I love that. I'm going to sit on the other side, and now I'm going to say, well, there's no trade with the colonies. The colonies would rather trade with other people except England anyway at this point, but it just shows more arrogance and short-sightedness, and the fact that King George III was very young. He was in his 20s. January 5th, 1776, the Assembly of New Hampshire adopts the first American state constitution. And now we're going to get into the good stuff. And I know Troy's salivating over this one, so I'm not even going to go to where I want to go with this. I'm going to let him actually lead off on this one. January 9th, 1776, Thomas Paine's Common Sense is published in Philadelphia. The 50-page pamphlet is highly critical of King George III and attacks allegiance to monarchy in principle while providing strong arguments for American independence. It becomes an instant bestseller in America. Quote, "We have it in our power to begin the world anew. American shall make a stand, not for herself alone, but for the world." End quote, Paine says. Now, I know Troy's got stuff ready for this one. Go ahead, Troy.
Well, I was doing some reading through today, and by the way, for those of you who don't have a copy of Common Sense, You can get your own copy right on the internet. Again, if you're too lazy to go there, first of all, you're already on the internet, so what's your problem? So you've got internet access, but get a hold of me, troylaplant.com. Get a hold of Brian on cooperativeblogger.com. We'll make sure, because I just printed this out in a PDF file just today, because I found it from a different source I like better than the original copy. But you can go to ushistory.org, and you will find your own copy there. Some things about common sense. Looking back, this was probably the one document, and it's 19 pages as I print them out. But this is probably the one thing that after the Olive Branch petition failed, that really spurred people to try to think towards independence. This is the book that, in its time, in its day, actually was up there selling as much. If it was actually the only book to outsell. I take that back. The only book that outsold Common Sense was the Bible itself. So when you look at its day and you look at the piety that was going on during its time period, then you look at the Bible was the only thing that outsold. That says a lot for how many people actually got a hold of it. It was published anonymously at first, and I've got actually a different publication date just the day later. I've got January 10th, during right in the middle of the beginning of the revolution, I guess. He had some feedback from Benjamin Rush, who actually was the one who gave him the title for the book as Common Sense. Throughout my reading and preparation for last week and this week, one of the things I did not run across is something I remember reading a long time ago, that he actually had given a copy to Benjamin Franklin, and Franklin gave him the feedback that his best advice is to burn it before anybody ever reads it, because Franklin knew exactly where this book was going to be pointed towards and what it was going to lead to. Basically, he comes up with a ton of arguments against British rule. Some of the things is just a little bizarre, I think. For instance, his argument that in the course of nature, an island should never be ruling an entire continent. That to me is a fallacious argument. But he hits some topics that you'll hear still thrown about today. The government that governs least governs best. You'll hear him talk about the English Constitution quite a bit. He talks about how and this guy wasn't even, he was not a Christian, he was not a Puritan, he was an avowed deist. He is one of the gentlemen who was a deist during that time period. But he talked about how the Puritans had come here because they wanted it as a safe zone from the British rule. You look at people like John Locke. He borrowed some ideas from Locke. He borrowed a few ideas from Jefferson, or the other way. Actually, they probably borrowed from each other when they came up with it. He actually came up with an idea for a constitution in this particular. You might as well call it a pamphlet, because it really wasn't a full book. Because, like I said, it's only 19 pages, but it was probably one of the most influential of its day. Now, taking a look at some quotes, he nailed it when he said, and he made no bones when he said things like, the remains of a monarchical tyranny in the person of the king. Now, compare that to what we just ran across when we were talking about the Olive Branch petition. He said, I know it's difficult to get over local or long-standing prejudices, yet if we will suffer ourselves to examine the component parts of the English Constitution, we shall find them to be the base remains of two ancient tyrannies compounded with some new republican materials. First, the remains of a monarchical tyranny in the person of the king. He didn't do the flowery verbosity that we talked about, and he didn't try to blame it on the lackeys, or in this case, Lokis, that were serving the king. Then he goes, the remains of aristocratical tyranny in the persons of the peers. So he turns right around and First he slaps the king, and then he turns around and slaps the Lokis. And then we talk about the new Republican materials in the persons of the commons, of whose virtue depends the freedom of England. Then he talks about the two first by being hereditary. So he really goes off about the king and the reign of the king being something that's passed from generation to generation, as opposed to talk about constitutional guidelines. And he talks about, I love this, the king is not to be trusted without being looked after, or in other words, that a thirst for absolute power is the natural disease of monarchy. And second, that the commons, by being appointed for that purpose, are either wise or more worthy of confidence than the crown. So he's really skewering quite a bit the monarchy and the English Constitution. And I'll shut up now and let you guys comment.
No, it was good stuff. But my source says it was a 50-page document, and by looking at it, it looks about right.
Yeah, probably so. Like I said, I printed it out at just 19 on an 8.5 by 11. But you're right. It was probably more like a 50-page. So it would be more like not really a novella. It would be a short, the equivalent of a short story, a Ray Bradbury, even less. And it's probably 50 pages as it was printed in its day.
I enjoyed reading it, frankly. And of course, Franklin would say burn it, because he was probably saying to him that if this ever gets out, you're going to be hung, man. And I think that's what Franklin was trying to tell him. If this ever gets out, you're a dead man. You're a dead man walking. Burn this thing. All right, Loki, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what Franklin was saying, because he would basically, common sense was treasonous, pure and simple. And the way that Thomas Paine slammed the crown, and he wasn't just slamming King George, he was slamming monarchy as a whole, so that actually extended into France and Spain and every other country in Europe that still had a monarchy, which was all of them at that point. And he was just, beating them with his words. And it could also have had a profound effect on support for our revolution. But I think Thomas Paine had I don't think he was, let's say he was not very diplomatic. He's a lot like I am at work. I don't have a tendency to pull too many punches. And he's a little bit more long-winded than I would be at work, but that's fine too.
Leave it to a sailor.
Yeah, that's precisely it. Typical Navy. I just have, two normally, and 3 words or 4 words. You're full of shit, But like I said, I have a diplomacy of a freight train. But what he was saying was also very important. I mean, what he was saying, he was speaking from his heart. He was sitting there saying that this is how we have lived in this nation. And he did consider the United States a separate nation at that point. Even though it was not named such as the United States, it was still the colonies. But he was also looking at the fact that we could, and more than that, should govern ourselves, and to separate ourselves from the crown and from the Parliament. But then again, he does make a distinct, a very good distinction between the difference between, Parliament and the aristocracy over there in England with your lords and nobles and whatnot, and so they're saying, who is really right? Who really has the power? Is it the aristocracy and these inherited monarchs? And that's all it was. I mean, the monarchs inherited the crown from their parents or their grandparents, their ancestors. And that's how they looked at it. I mean, it was due to them. You don't even ask. You give it to them with no question asked. And I think that was one thing that he was looking at very insightful, saying that your leaders should also be chosen by effectively the people. Back at you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you have to agree. And I know this is a pub and all, but we kind of want this to be an educational tool. So if we could refrain from certain words, I'm not judging because I know right after I do this, I'm going to slip and say the wrong word. I just know it. But not to worry. On the recording, I will go in and boop that one out.
That's fine.
But yeah, if we could try to use words like horse pocky or crap is even acceptable, I think, to most people. No, I'm not. Look, I'm not one to judge. Believe me, I slip. I have actually said the F-bomb at least once on my show by accident and apologized profusely. These things do happen, and there's no delay to get it out, people. So I mean, there was no offense, man. You know, he's just expressing himself, and rightly so, frankly. But damn it, now I gotta go in there and get rid of that. Yeah, that's what we need.
I keep that on my computer for editing stuff.
Good. Can you send that to me, please? I don't have any beeps.
I will.
All right. I just want to do a little reading on this because I actually thought the way again I'm gonna go to the Bible, the Patriots' History of the United States. I just love this book. When I say the Bible, I don't mean to compare it to the Bible, folks. It's just kind of when I want to understand a little context of history. This book just does such a fabulous job. It's not what I use for most of my show because it's not an exact reference material as much as it is explaining American history to you. I use so many different sources every week. It comes from other places. I'm eventually just going to have to put all my different sources I've ever used up for the pub so everyone knows where I went because I could never put all these links up for all the different shows we're doing. To talk about the common sense and the Declaration of Independence. Try not to go too much into the Declaration of Independence because that's next show. Washington's ragtag army tied up British forces. Feelings for independence grew more intense. The movement awaited only a spokesman who could galvanize public opinion around resistance against the king. How likely, then, was the figure that emerged? Thomas Paine had come to America just over a year before he wrote Common Sense. Arriving as a failure in almost everything he attempted in life, he wrecked his first marriage, and his second wife paid him to leave. He destroyed two businesses, one as a tobacconist and one as a corset maker. I get the feeling the second wife had something to do with the corset maker. And flopped as a tax collector. But Paine had fire in his blood and defiance in his pen. In January 1776, he wrote the 50-page political tract Common Sense, which began with one of the most memorable lines in history. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But eager readers did not shrink from buying the book, which quickly sold more than 100,000 copies. Eventually, Paine sold close to 500,000 copies prior to 1800, and he could have been a wealthy man if he hadn't donated every cent he earned to the Revolution. Common Sense provided the prelude to Jefferson's Declaration of Independence that appeared in July 1776. Paine argued that the time for loyalty to the king had ended. Quote, the blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, 'tis time to part, end quote. He thus tapped into widespread public sentiment, evidenced by the petitions urging independence that poured into the Continental Congress. Many colonial delegates received instructions from home to support independence by May 1776. On May 15th, Virginia resolved in its convention to create a Declaration of Rights and a Constitution of Federation and foreign alliances, and in June it established a Republican government for all intents and purposes, declaring its independence from England. Patrick Henry became governor. Virginia led the way, and when the state congressional delegates were sent to vote on independence, only Virginia's instructions were not conditional. Commonwealth had already thrown down the gauntlet. In June, Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee introduced a resolution that, quote, these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, end quote. The statement so impressed John Adams that he wrote, quote, this day the Congress has passed the most important resolution ever taken in America, end quote. As the momentum towards separation with England grew, Congress appointed a committee to draft a statement announcing independence. Members included Adams, Franklin, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and the chairman, Thomas Jefferson, to whom the privilege of writing the final draft fell. Jefferson wrote so eloquently and succinctly that Adams and Franklin made only a few alterations, including Franklin's, quote, self-evident phrase. Most of the changes had to do with adding references to God. I won't go any farther on this one because we're moving into the Declaration of Independence on the next few paragraphs, and we're saving that because we're moving ahead of ourselves. All right, so to continue the timeline, March 4 through 1776, American forces captured Dorchester Heights, which overlooks Boston Harbor. Captured British artillery from Fort Ticonderoga, which we talked about earlier. It's placed on the heights to enforce the siege against the British in Boston. The British evacuate Boston and set sail for Halifax. George Washington then rushes to New York to set up defenses, anticipating the British plan to invade New York City. April 6, 1776. Continental Congress declares colonial shipping ports open to all traffic except the British. Congress had already authorized privateer raids on British ships and also advised disarming all Americans loyal to England. April 12, 1776. The North Carolina Assembly is the first to empower its delegates in the Continental Congress to vote for independence from Britain. May 2nd, 1776. The American revolutionaries get the much-needed foreign support they had been hoping for. King Louis XVI of France commits $1 million in arms and munitions. Spain then also promises support. That's $1 million back in 1776, folks. June 28, 1776. May 10, 1776. The Continental Congress authorizes each of the 13 colonies to form local provincial governments. June 28, 1776, in South Carolina, American forces at Fort Moultrie successfully defend Charleston against the British naval attack and inflict heavy damage on the fleet. June to July 1776, a massive British war fleet arrives in New York Harbor consisting of 30 battleships with 1,200 cannon, 30,000 soldiers, 10,000 sailors, and 300 supply ships under the command of General William Howe and his brother, Admiral Lord Richard Howe. Now things are getting hinky. June to July 1776, on June 7th, Richard Henry Lee, a Virginia delegate to the Continental Congress, presents a formal resolution calling for America to declare its independence from Britain. Congress decides to postpone its decision until July. On June 11, Congress appoints a committee to draft a Declaration of Independence. We talked about the committee members. First draft, blah, 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 blah. Jefferson is chosen by the committee to prepare the first draft of the Declaration, which he completes in one day. Just 17 days later, June 28, Jefferson's Declaration of Independence is ready and is presented to the Congress with changes made by Adams and Franklin, though minor. On July 2, 12 of the 13 colonial delegations, New York abstains, vote in support of Lee's resolution for independence. On July 4, the Congress formally endorses Jefferson's declaration with copies to be sent to all of the colonies. The actual signing of the document occurs on August 2nd, as most of the 55 members of Congress place their names on the parchment copy. We're going to go to comments and discussion because this is where we leave off tonight's Patriots Pub, because we have a lot of work to do going into the Declaration of Independence, which we'll be doing next show. Declaration of Independence, and I don't think we'll even go any further than that. I think I just want to talk about Declaration of Independence, the people that signed the Declaration of Independence, what happened to the people that signed the Declaration of Independence, and the discussion of the importance of the Declaration of Independence. I might go through a few battles afterwards, but I don't think I'm going to have the time. But let's just really focus next week, folks, on the Declaration of Independence, the people that signed it, the risks they took, what happened to them, their families, their fortunes, their lives, etc. Okay, we'll start this time. Loki, go ahead, you're on here.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, and I do think this is a good point to leave off, because looking at it's gonna take a while to cover the Declaration and what it actually meant, and what the gentlemen that put their names to that document were willing to give up, and did give up, to see this country come into being. And there were actually a lot of them that never saw that. And I think it is going to be it's going to need to look at it. And we're going to also, one thing I want to bring up is, when people talk about being patriotic, they have no idea what patriotism is until you look at what the signers gave up. But like I said, that's next week, and I am looking forward to that show, very much so. Back at you, sir.
Thank you, Loki. Troy, you have anything to add? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here pouting because we didn't talk more about common sense, and I actually had more material, and we're not going to cover it, but that's okay. I understand. We got a timeline to meet. Yeah, I look here and looking at the timeline, July the 2nd. People talk about the 4th of July, that Congress formally endorses the Declaration. I always look at July the 2nd, only because, that's a day upon, the anniversary of my birth. So I always look at July the 2nd actually being the real Independence Day, when 12 of 13 colonial delegations actually vote in support of the resolution for independence. So, yeah, that's it. I'll shut up.
No, I wasn't. I didn't know you had anything else to say on common sense. If
you didn't ask either.
I thought you only had those two. I thought you said I had two things, and you said two things, so I just if you've got more, please do.
Dude, the two things are like the olive branch petition. No, I actually did have some other stuff, but that's fine. And I recommend, there's a couple of things, Brian, as long as I'm bringing it up. I'm not going to go back to common sense, but here's what I do recommend, not only for you guys, you two listening, but also to anybody listening to this podcast. If you want to hear common sense, you don't want to just read it, and if you would rather listen to it, whether it be on your iPod or burn it to a compact disc or whatever, there is actually a good service. I want to give a plug on the internet that if you go to Americana Phonic, that's a site that I've enjoyed lately, Americana Phonic, PHONIC.com. You can actually download audio recordings of common sense, the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence, the Gettysburg Address. So if there's anything that you want to listen to in its entirety, For instance, when we get to the Declaration of Independence, it might not be a bad idea to download, and Brian, I don't know if you have the capability, I know on my podcast I do, to actually play an audio clip and have that be part of your selection on the show. But anybody who wants to hear this stuff, that's a great site, and as long as we're plugging websites that are out there that are full of American history. So if you want to listen to Common Sense, all 4 chapters plus the appendix, all that is available for MP3 audio download, as well as some of the other projects that are out there. And quite honestly, this is a project I thought about doing myself. I want to do Patrick Henry's narration. I want to do the "Give Me Liberty" or "Give Me Death" speech, and put that into an MP3 and put that on the internet for download and that sort of thing. So there are great resources out there. As Brian was saying, there's more than one source out there. For instance, when you were talking about looking at things such as the Declaration of Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms, I had a hard time finding that on the internet. You got to look in numerous sources, and hopefully, Brian, maybe we can put out some links for some of those sources. Back to you.
Okay. Well, first of all, you can find it on, again, sometimes I get on a site and I find a lot of information, I stick with it, and other times I just keep going off. Normally I have about 10 windows open at once on one subject, and I end up picking the best. HistoryPlace.com, again, historyplace.com/UnitedStates/revolution/common.htm will take you right to it. I just happened to be on this. This site was the best site for the documents I was pulling up this day. This changes, but there's no reason not to use it. It's a perfectly valid site. As far as Troy, I think I wanted to ask you one thing. I just tried to run what you were trying to say through my browser, and I'm coming up with nothing. Americanaphonics.org or .com, I get nothing. Go ahead.
Yeah, Americanaphonic, PHONIC.com. And matter of fact, one of the things that you can do, if you look up, go to Ye Olde Wikipedia, and you look at the bottom of Common Sense. On that page, there's actually a link that takes you over to Americana, AMERICANAPHONIC. I believe it's .com.
Ain't .com. Let's see .net. Let's try .net.
No S, Brian. It's not phonics.
Yeah, it's .com.
Oh, okay.
Americanaphonic.com.
That's where I ran into trouble. I had phonics, not phonics.
Well, you're hooked on phonics.
Phonics is so much fun.
See, good thing I'm a mind reader too, huh?
Yes, it is. Very good, Loki. Don't get you all hooked on phonics. All right, folks. Does anybody have anything to add tonight before we end the show? Go ahead. Just choose one. Just come in and do it.
I don't really have anything to add. It's a real pleasure working on this project with the two of you, though. I'm actually having a very good time of it, and I just want to let you know there's going to be a time in about 3 weeks where I may or may not be able to do the show. I'm going to start working long hours at work for about 6 weeks, from 6 in the evening till 6 in the morning. So I'll let you know when that is, and when I can make it in, I'll make it in.
No problem, Loki. You know, your family obligations always come first. I respect that greatly. And besides the work you do, keep the people in your area safe, okay? That's
Absolutely.
Troy, you got something? Good.
Actually, I'm hoping to be able to stick with the project as long as I can. Unlike Loki, what I've got going on is, yes, I do have a technical and sometimes freakish hour job, but myself running for town council, I'm going to try to keep Thursday nights open from the campaign season so that I can actually stick here. I'm having a good time, actually, because what it's forced me to do, and I even wrote about it, actually, it's in today's The Selma News, where there's a big plug for the Patriots Pub in print for, all 1,300 subscribers to the newspaper, or however many there are, now published on the internet each and every week on my blog as well. But I put a plug in for this, and one of the things I talked about was it's forcing me to go back and read. It's forcing me to study the things that I was never forced to study when I was in school. We'd heard about common sense with Thomas Paine. We'd heard about the Declaration of Independence. Yes, we even had to memorize some of it, but what we never did is what we're doing, is looking over historically, point by point, throughout a timeline, and see all the things that led up to our ultimate goal, is to get into the writing of and the discussion of the Constitution and its application. And this has been a great re-education for myself, and also I've had a great time being able to talk to Loki offline as well. So it's caused me to be able to build another friendship this way, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity, Brian.
Well, it is my pleasure, folks, I have to tell you. You've all been great. This is a great project, and I must say, if it wasn't for this show, there were days I would choose not to study this topic because I have other things I have to do. But I have to make time, and I have to do it. And yeah, you're right. It kind of forces you when it would be easier to choose other things. And I'd like to say, good for you. You're running for city council. Fantastic. This is the kind of citizenship involvement I like to see. That's fantastic. That's great. And thanks for the plug for the Patriots Pub, which of course is not mine. It's ours. It's someone said, "Oh, go ahead."
Yeah, I did. I just remembered something. I lost. What was the link you said? The direct link to the Patriots Pub.
PatriotsPub.us.
Oh, .us. Okay, that's what I forgot. All right. I got to make sure I plug that on my show every week, or every show. That's .us. All right. That's the part I screwed up.
Yeah, I put that as a link on my talk show as well, so that the links page can always come back over to this page, and I've been referencing it myself. So that's we're hoping. And the other thing, like we discussed last week, I'm saving everything and bringing them to disc. And something to keep in mind: CDs are only 80 minutes long. So if we want to put them on one disc, that's something to keep in mind for the general time frame that we're talking about each and every week. Otherwise, you have to break them up into numerous CDs, but that's fine. Right. This is a kind of thing that if people are enjoying what they're hearing, if this is stuff that they don't get a chance to hear normally, they want to keep it for posterity, download it, put it on your iPod, or burn it to compact disc. And if you've got some school students, granted with a little beep here or there, Loki, then you may be able to actually you may be able to distribute.
Yeah, I just want to say, if anyone's downloaded the last week's show before I got to it and cleaned it up, where I dropped out in the beginning and blah blah blah. That was the weekend of thunderstorms. I cleaned it up and uploaded it, so you might want to catch the cleaned up version that I re-uploaded to the site, so that you don't have that whole "Where'd Brian go?"
I did get that
but
version.
I left some of the stuff in there.
Yeah, I enjoyed that.
I got that version that you had cleaned up with all that edited out. I thought maybe you had done that, but I still got the part that should have been beep towards the end.
Oops, I missed something.
Yeah,
I thought he did a good job of cleaning that up.
I listened to it just this afternoon, where Loki refers to himself as the end of the digestive tract.
Well, isn't that an anatomical term?
Yeah, it was on a doctor's chart one day. That's where I learned
that
it.
without yourself, Troy, for your compilation. All right, guys. I think this is a good time to end the pub, even though it sounds we're having a great time here. Okay, we got to, but we're good. We're an hour and 15 minutes. We had a great show tonight. I enjoy every show with you guys. Great input. I think this is a great project. I like the fact that it's relaxed so people don't feel like they're being talked to by the monotone teacher in the classroom. And I hope people can enjoy it and get educated in a fun sense. Remember, this is the Patriots Pub, patriotspub.us on every Thursday night, 8 p.m. till when we're done, usually about an hour. And make sure to tune in next week for what I
when Loki says
we're going to do. We're going to do the Declaration. Declaration of Independence. We will be doing a Declaration of Independence. Dang it.
What can I say? I'm a sailor, you know.
Oh my Lord. Hey, nothing wrong with that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to play a Coast Guard song, which I always play when I leave. Semper Paratus. Oh, ready, always ready. Rubber phones, tune in. We're glad you tuned in. Pull up a stool, vibe on your favorite beverage, and learn U.S. history with the rest of us. All right, thank you, folks, and good night.
Good night.
Oh no, he hit the beam again. He's making jokes in the beam. It's lucky that shit really. I got this beep for beep. No, it's I don't have a delay. I couldn't leave it. I'll try and remember to keep it off the recording. It's like what you forgot last week. You beat that on the ending. That's what he's saying. Well, you know, the end of the intestinal tract. Oh, that's funny.